Hey everybody. I got this piece of anonymous feedback last week that I thought was really interesting, and I was writing out this Piazza note about it, and then I decided, well, it's getting kind of long, so why don't I just make a video instead, and hopefully that'll take less time. So this student asked me why the preliminaries are out of 3 and not out of 4, and gave some pretty good arguments for why they should actually be out of 4 and not out of 3. So I love talking about teaching, which is why I'm making this video. You can watch it if you want to find out why the preliminaries are out of 3. And if you don't really care, then that's okay. You don't have to watch this video. Okay, 2 main objections to why the preliminaries should not be out of 3. The first is practical. If you're consistently getting just a little bit less than perfect on the preliminaries, then you're really getting 2 out of 3, which is equivalent to 66%, rather than 100%. And the issue here is, doesn't this seem to be not a very good representation of how much you actually know? So first of all, there's this giant question of how accurately your marks actually represent how much you know. But putting that aside, and just looking at the practical benefit of, say, switching to a 4-point scale rather than a 3-point scale, if you got consistently less than perfect, then your mark would increase from a 66% to a 75% on the preliminaries, which, if you're following marking scheme 1, this amounts to a 0.9 difference in your final mark. So I'll resist the temptation to dismiss this out of hand for being too small to really worry about, although personally I think it is too small to really worry about. Instead, I'll give a different argument. This 0.9%, that's the difference between making the preliminaries out of 3 versus making them out of 4, they're exactly balanced by a LaTeX bonus that you could have earned on the first 3 assignments. Because using the first marking scheme, 3 assignments are worth 9%, and the LaTeX bonus then would have been 0.9%. So even from a practical point of view, maybe you're losing a few marks undeservedly, but you're gaining a few marks too for using LaTeX, which has nothing to do with the course content. Not at all. Okay, but putting aside the practicality, there's maybe a more interesting issue, which is the psychology of getting a preliminary back, getting 2 out of 3, seeing that you made a silly mistake, and then thinking, oh gosh, just one mistake and now I'm down to a 60 rather than a 75. If this has happened to you and you felt bad because you've gotten a 60 on a preliminary, then while I feel bad that you feel bad, I would suggest that the best way to solve this is actually to change your attitude, because preliminaries aren't about getting marks. They're about getting feedback. They're about making mistakes, being told you're making mistakes, so then you don't go and make the same mistakes on the final or the midterm. Let's say you're a student who made a mistake on the first preliminary, fixated on that 60%, and then went to write the midterm forgetting the mistake that you made, and then making the same mistake on the midterm. So what happens? You lose a mark on the midterm. The first midterm was out of 20, so that's 5%. The first midterm was worth 10% of your mark according to the first marking scheme. So that's 0.5 of your final mark. That mistake that you made on the preliminary, that might have cost you something like 0.33 of your final mark. But not learning from that mistake and making the same mistake again on the midterm costs more. So if I were you and I were taking this class, I wouldn't think about my mark for the preliminaries at all. I wouldn't sit down and try to calculate my mark based on my preliminaries. I would sit down and write down all of the mistakes that I made, all of the feedback that I got, and then make sure I don't make those same mistakes when there might be higher stakes. Okay, so these are responses to arguments about why a marking scheme out of 3 is bad. But why is it good? Why do I actually like it? So the truth is, I don't think the preliminary should be worth any marks at all. Because of what I said earlier, the preliminaries are not about marks, they're about feedback. But if I didn't make the preliminaries be worth anything, then my fear would be that at most half of you would actually do them. really I'm sacrificing the integrity of your learning a little bit by motivating you through marks, which I don't like to do. So that's why they're worth marks. But why 3? So easiest would be a binary scale, 0 or 1. And I'd be okay with this if the questions I were asking you were like multiple choice questions or really, really, really basic questions like definitions. But the questions that I ask you in the preliminaries, even though they're pretty straightforward, they're more complicated than a simple multiple choice. So I think that just having a binary system of 0, 1, that's not really fine enough. Okay, so what about being out of 2? 0, 1, 2. You could say something like 0 is just you didn't hand it in or had no idea. 2 is you did the question perfectly. And 1 is you made a mistake somewhere along the line. But again, I don't think this is fine enough. Not all mistakes are made equal. And what I really want to be able to do with preliminaries is distinguish between conceptual mistakes, major errors that indicate that you didn't really pick up the course material, and minor mistakes, things where it's clear you know what's going on, but you just didn't do things perfectly because maybe you made a calculation mistake, maybe you didn't define something properly, or maybe your explanation just wasn't very clear. All of these things can happen even if you understand induction, for example, or even if you understand the master theorem. So that's why there's a 3-point scale. 0, you didn't hand it in or had absolutely no idea. 3, for you did things perfectly. 2, for you clearly understand what's going on, but you made some small mistakes. And 1, for significant conceptual mistakes. And to me, that marking scheme is not only sensible, it's usually pretty easy for the TAs to distinguish between these 4, and therefore they can get them back quickly. And therefore they can mark them quickly, and so you can get feedback in time for your problem sets. That hasn't always happened, unfortunately, but that is the goal. So my challenge to you, if you want me to implement a 4-point preliminary, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, tell me what these 5 things should mean, what they should look like on the page, and what they should indicate about what a student knows and what a student doesn't know. And if you give me something that makes sense, maybe I'll use it. Thanks for watching and have a great day.